Excellent. Well, today I would like to talk a little bit about teaching models for people who instruct HEMA. Again, same as the last presentation I did. If at any point you're having difficulty following what I'm saying, if I'm speaking too quickly or you just can't handle the accent, wave at me and I'll try and do better. So, start with a little bit of background about myself. I'm currently 24 years old. I've been doing martial arts since I was 10, so about 14 years. I've been teaching martial arts in various different capacities and different levels since I was 11. So I've been teaching martial arts for slightly more than half my life. I'm in the very lucky position of having been taught how to teach martial arts. My karate instructor and lots of other instructors within my karate organisations taught me how to teach, and so I'm aware of a number of different teaching models, approaches and theories. And today I would like to share with you some of the models that I use when I'm teaching my students. So, models that I will cover today: teaching towards outcomes, another model that deals with the differences between teaching, coaching, training and supervision, the theory of the magic number 7, plus or minus 2, and the HEMA drizzle, which is a code name. So, teaching towards outcomes. To start with, an outcome is the desired end goal that you want to work towards achieving. Whenever you teach a lesson on whatever subject, you should be trying to achieve something. You should be trying to achieve something specific. You don't want to just achieve something. You want to be achieving something specific. It can be whatever you want. The goal itself doesn't matter. But the lesson should be working towards achieving this goal. It might seem a little bit bureaucratic. Everything should be working towards one goal. But in my experience, it does help to improve the impact and the value, and indeed the focus of a lesson. If you can do a lesson, just a bit of this and a bit of that, and at the end of the lesson everyone's had fun, awesome. It's not really achieved anything. It helps if you have an end goal towards which you're working. So, what do you want to achieve the most by the end of your lesson? What is the main goal that you want to achieve? That is your primary outcome. That is the outcome that you really, really want to achieve. So for example, at the end of this longsword lesson, I want my students to improve their understanding of the concepts of distance, range and timing. A nice broad, fairly general sort of outcome, but that's what I'm working towards. Alternatively, at the end of this lesson, I want to pressure test my students and have them sweating. Lots of hard work. It's a good general, broad goal, but that's what I'm wanting to achieve. Again, alternatively, I want my students to learn how to hold a sword and make a couple of cuts that look convincing. That's a good goal for the first 1 or 2 lessons. A lot of new beginners come into your club. You just want them to be able to do something that looks about right. It's a good beginning goal. Once you know what your primary outcome should be, you can start to plan your lesson. And every activity in that lesson should be working towards achieving this goal. Even if it has other values, even if it achieves other goals as well, you should be trying to structure everything so everything is working towards achieving this goal. You can have secondary outcomes, other goals that you want to achieve, but they should not supersede or take priority over the primary outcome. So, taking the first example again, at the end of this longsword lesson, I want my students to improve their understanding of the concepts of distance, range and timing. I might also decide, as a secondary outcome, that I would like my students to improve their footwork and perhaps also to improve their technical correctness in parries. I'd like them to do this. That would be wonderful if they managed to achieve all 3 things, but the one thing they must achieve is to improve their understanding of the distance, range and timing. Bearing in mind your primary outcome and any secondary goals that you've chosen. as instructors, even as practitioners, you will have a repertoire of ideas, of exercises, of activities, things. Every instructor who teaches, you'll probably learn a new exercise from every instructor. And this just builds your repertoire. You think, I know the exercise will train this. That's an interesting problem. I remember this person taught a drill that will address that issue. You build a repertoire, and once you know what your primary goal in the lesson will be, you can pick exercises from your repertoire. Think of them like building blocks, and you can build up your lesson with drills and exercises that achieve this outcome. You've got to be careful. You can't just include anything. Perhaps you do have a wonderful exercise that teaches people how to cut differently and powerfully from different guard positions. It's a very useful exercise, and everyone probably should do that sort of thing at some point. But unless that exercise leads towards the primary goal, it should not be in the lesson. Why not? Because if you include something that does not contribute towards the primary goal, then the lesson becomes fragmented, and activities that are working towards the primary outcome are not reinforced. In fact, they may indeed be countered or confused by an activity that teaches something else, and you run the risk of just confusing your lesson, diffusing the activities, and at the end of the lesson, everyone's had fun, but no one's learned something that you want them to learn. So, for example, if the primary outcome is, I want to pressure test my students and have them sweating by the end of the session. I want to put them under a lot of pressure, make sure their interpretations or their skills work, and I want to make sure that they're putting a lot of energy and effort into it. So by the end of the session, I want them all sweating. Awesome. But if part of my lesson is to give them an exercise where they stand in a group and discuss how to interpret a plate from one of Talbot's books, that's not helping. It's not getting them sweating, it's not pressuring them, it's giving them a chance to slack off and just stand there and chat. It might be a useful exercise, and yes, it is a useful exercise. It's a wonderful exercise at the right time. It's very good if we want to teach how to interpret sources, but it does not help the students build up a sweat or to pressure test their skills. It detracts from this lesson, and it just confuses and fragments everything. So when you're picking your activities, make sure they're all focused towards achieving that primary goal, and they're not looking at achieving something else. You want to plan your lessons so that you have a primary outcome and all activities, exercises, drills, and everything work towards achieving this goal. If you do choose secondary outcomes as well, then you need to have your exercises work towards achieving both the outcomes, but without detracting from the primary goal. So you might want to pick an exercise that achieves the primary goal and also trains the secondary goal, but you should not pick an exercise that only trains the secondary goal, because then you're losing the overall thrust of the lesson. Generally speaking, it is much easier to work with just a single primary outcome until you are in the habit of working towards a single goal. Then as your abilities to structure a lesson improve, you can challenge yourself as a teacher, and almost like a chess player, you can challenge your strategy and your ability to build things up by adding one secondary outcome, two secondary outcomes, three secondary outcomes. You can challenge yourself and also help to develop your students as your abilities as an instructor increase. But whatever you do, never detract from that one goal that you want to achieve. So, that's the first model, nice and short, to the point. Always make sure you're achieving what you want to achieve. The second model is teaching, coaching, training, and supervision. Some definitions. Teaching is the introduction of completely new information. At the moment, I'm teaching this model because it's new information. Coaching is the development and improvement of existing information and skills. Training is the practice of information, either new information or old information, but training is the practice of information. And supervision is ensuring that what is trained is what is supposed be trained, and not something else. So, teaching. We have to teach in order to introduce new information to the students. If we don't teach anything, then the students will not learn anything new. At some point you have to introduce new information. You need to be careful about how much new information you introduce at any one time. It's very easy to become carried away, very enthusiastic, and tell your students everything you know about the subject. They're just standing there going, right over the head. You need to be careful. Judging how much to teach, how much new information to give, can be quite tricky. And often the best idea is just to teach a little bit of new information and then spend some time coaching it. So what is coaching? Coaching, well, sometimes it's entirely possible to run a very successful lesson without actually teaching anything. You don't need to always be presenting new information. Sometimes it's enough just to be getting people better at things. So you can run a lesson without teaching anything, and at the end of the session, the students will all have improved. Due to successful coaching, you take the existing information and the existing skills, and you develop and improve these existing abilities and the understanding of the students. It requires a lot of coaching for most people to become good at any given skill. Without the coaching, if the information or skill is simply introduced, just taught, but never actually coached, never improved upon, then, well, the information will be known, but not understood. And the skill will never develop to be useful and effective. And of course, the best time to give coaching is during training. Training, well, it's very difficult to internalise and understand a skill without some kind of practice or training. Excuse me. So, I've heard it said, there's a theory that says, it requires 10,000 repetitions to become good at any physical movement. I don't necessarily agree with this. I think you can become good at a movement with less than 10,000 repetitions. But I agree with the principle. You need to repeat something to become good at it. Without repetitions, you can never develop your technical skill. Without the opportunity to practice, you cannot take your knowledge and learn how to apply it. And training has to be the foundation of everything we do in HEMA if we want our students to become skillful. If we just spend time talking and discussing or just teaching you information, it's awesome. We'll know a lot. We just won't be able to do very much. In the Codex Nobringer, the HS 3227A, there's a quote: "For practice is better than art, because your exercise does well without the art, but the art is not much good without the exercise." If you just practice lots, you can become quite good. Maybe not amazing, maybe not the best, but you can become quite good if you just practice. If all you do is study the theory, you get no practical skills, you get no practical ability. You have to do your training. The other stuff is a bonus. Supervision. Exercises can often begin to train something other than the intended skill if you leave students to their own devices. It's very entertaining to watch. You teach something, you give people a new exercise, you just don't look for a minute or two, and then you see what people are doing. And it's amazing, the new exercises you can add to your repertoire. If part of a drill, so one student to hit the other student, then this is intended to teach the first person how to deliver a particular strike. If the other student changes the drill to defend himself against this incoming strike, then it's no longer training the correct thing. All of a sudden, the first student loses the opportunity to practice the skill of landing a correct hit, with the correct part of the sword, at the correct distance, taking the correct stance. You lose that ability, that opportunity to train, because the other person has changed the drill. And it's now giving the other person the practice of defending against the strike, which is useful, but not what we're looking to practice. The intended outcome has been corrupted. Rather than learning how to deliver a good strike, it's now learning how to parry. It's no longer the same outcome. And so the exercise is now working against the intended development of the lesson. We must supervise our students to ensure that they are doing precisely what is being asked of them. Nothing more, nothing less, and certainly nothing else. Furthermore, we have to ensure that everything remains safe. We need to keep an eye on our class and put a stop to any unsafe behaviour before it can take hold of an individual or the class in general. Supervision is about supervising and just keeping everything safe. We must be mindful of how much time we allocate to the exercises within our practice, so that everything works together properly to develop the lesson and achieve the primary outcome. One time. Supervision is simply ensuring that everything is going safely and correctly in a timely fashion. Why are these definitions and distinctions important? One of the interesting things for me is when I listen to foreigners speaking in English, you often use the word trainer to describe what I would call an instructor. Some people might call them teachers or coaches. The Americans tend to call instructors coaches, and often in Britain we tend to call them teachers. But we see that teaching, coaching and training are slightly different. I prefer the term instructor. A good instructor is instructing his class using all of these skills. So that's just a language aside. So without ever teaching something new, students will always be stuck practicing the same old things again and will become bored. But by only teaching new information and never coaching existing skills, students will never gain a firm grasp of the basics and will never be able to learn the more complex skills properly. Without enough training time, students will never be able to internalise the skills and information, and all the teaching and coaching will be futile. Without supervision, the class will end up doing something else, and the primary outcome will never be achieved. So how might you implement this model in a lesson? Well, start the lesson by teaching something new, a new technique, a new concept, whatever. Teach it, introduce the new information to the students. Send the students to train this information. Supervise the activity to make sure that people are still training the right thing and that you give a sufficient amount of time for people to do their practice. After that, call the students in, give them some coaching. So that was a good first attempt. Wonderful. But here are some common mistakes that I saw a lot of you making. Now watch how I do this motion and see how this makes everything work better. So you do a little bit of coaching, you improve the information, you improve the practice, and then you send students to do a bit more training with this improved information. Supervise them again to make sure they're still training the correct thing and to make sure it's all safe. And allow the students an appropriate amount of time to practice. And you repeat this coaching step as often as you need. Be sensible about how much new information you teach at any given time. Not too much, not too little. Just be sensible. Ensure your students have adequate training time to learn and internalise information and skills for themselves. Use this training time to help coach the students to improve how they perform the skills and how they understand the information, and always supervise everything to ensure that students are practicing the correct thing safely and that you stay on time with your lesson. The exception to this rule is something like a lecture. Today I am teaching as much as I possibly can, giving lots of new information, providing plenty of examples to try to coach the information as I go along, to help you understand it better. I'm not just giving you the new information, I'm giving you examples and revisiting the subjects and trying to coach it to make it better. I'm supervising the lecture to make sure I'm working to my schedule. Pretty much on time. I can't really give you any time to train this information because, well, we've only got 40 minutes and it's a lecture. You can't really train during a lecture. So, you'll have to do your training to internalise this information either by going back to your clubs and teaching in this kind of style, or by writing up some lesson plans in your plain mode. So, the next model we're going to look at, I'm sorry for going through these so swiftly, but we don't have a lot of time. The magic number 7 plus or minus 2. There's a psychology theory about how much people can learn, how much information they can hold in their short-term memory, and it's often nicknamed the magic number theory. So this magic number is 7 plus or minus 2, and it is a very important concept for us as teachers to learn and to understand. So the magic number is 5 plus or minus 2 for an infant, 6 plus or minus 2 for a child, between maybe roughly 4 and 12 years of age, and 7 plus or minus 2 for teenagers and adults. Older adults, maybe in their 60s, certainly in 70s and 80s and so on, it goes back down to 6, because, well, our ability to remember stuff decreases as we become older. I know, I'm certainly feeling my old age. So for the purpose of this lecture, we are just going to deal with the concept of teaching adults. Everything holds the same for teaching younger people, it's just the magic number that changes. So the average adult can handle 7 pieces of information at any given time. Think of it like random access memory in a computer. There are only 7 items that can be accessed at random. If it's a slightly more intelligent adult, this goes up to 8. And a very intelligent adult can handle 9 pieces of information. However, an adult with slightly below average ability to handle information might only be able to handle 6 pieces of information, and an adult with severe impairments might only be able to handle 5. So whenever you teach new information, each piece of information counts as 1 item for memory. And it's quite fascinating, it's quite amazing just how much the items of information build up. So let's take this example, this statement. Nice and simple. When performing at Zornhall, you stand in vom tag with your left foot forward and the sword on your right shoulder, with your right hand closest to the crossguard. Then make a descending strike with the long edge of the sword from your shoulder and follow afterwards with a step with your right leg. Nice and simple. That's how you do it, Zornhall. How many pieces of information are in there? So, lots. 1. Performing the Zornhall. 2. Stand in vom tag. 3. Left foot forward. 4. Sword on the right shoulder. 5. With your right hand. 6. Closest to the crossguard. 7. Make a descending strike. 8. With the long edge. 9. From your shoulder, because you're not letting it hang back and you're not doing something different, it's straight on the shoulder. 10. Follow afterwards, not before. Do the strike and follow after it. 11, with a step, not a shuffle or a lunge or anything, but with a step. 12 with your right leg. That's 12 pieces of information in that statement. 12 items of information. And the average adult can only handle 7. So, for a beginner, even if the beginner is a very intelligent adult, 12 pieces of information is far too much. I teach university students quite a lot, and I would like to think that most of them are quite intelligent. Sometimes not. I would like to think so. I would like to think that university students can handle 8 or 9 pieces of information. But even so, it's still only 8 or 9, not 12. As teachers, we need to make sure that we introduce information so that no more than 7 items of information are introduced at once. So for example, to perform a Zornhall, make a descending cut from your right shoulder with the long edge, stepping as you cut. It doesn't have quite the same richness of detail, it's not quite as good for a more advanced practitioner, but it's simple enough to get the message across to a beginner. 5 pieces of information. To perform a Zornhall, make a descending cut from your right shoulder with the long edge, stepping as you cut. Nice and simple. Later on it can be made more complex, you can break it down, add more items, but no one should struggle with this definition of the Zornhall. It's simple enough. Now imagine a phone number. These digits are made up at random. You can call this if you want. I've got no idea who will answer. So, let's say we've got a friend called Bob. Bob's number is +441562340296. It's 14 pieces of information. Very difficult to remember when learned as a single stream of digits because it exceeds the magic number 7. But we can make this much easier by a technique called chunking. You turn lots of information into chunks of information, fewer chunks. So now, Bob's number, +441562340296. Now it looks a bit more like a phone number, and there's only 5 items of information. The person, the country code, the area code, the first phrase, and the second phrase. Makes it much easier to remember, and much easier to recall to mind just at random at a later date. But let's imagine Bob's quite a good friend. You call him quite often. So eventually, the chunking becomes better. You think, Bob, +441562 340296. Nice and simple. You just think Bob and you go, yes, this is the number. After enough time of learning the phone number, you learn the whole phone number. And then there are only two pieces of information, the number and the fact that that number lets us contact Bob. And then finally, if you call Bob all the time, the fingers learn the pattern for typing the digits into the phone and the number becomes muscle memory. The fingers just think, you think, I want to call Bob, and the fingers go, yes, I know what to do, sorted. Muscle memory is a very important thing for martial artists. We want our students to develop muscle memory because that is when the action is performed almost on automatic. When the student does not need to analyse and think about every part of the action, the student just realises that he needs to do something and then he just does it. It just happens. Muscle memory is developed by constant repetition and constant training. It is not developed until a technique or skill has been trained extensively, so we need to give our students the training time to develop their muscle memory. When we teach, when we want to introduce new information, there needs to be a maximum of 7 pieces of information. And then everyone can keep all of the information in mind, and no one forgets some of the items. Then by training the information for some amount of time, mind and body begin to chunk the pieces of information together. It becomes easier to remember how to perform different techniques without having to spend time thinking about the point of origin, or the striking mechanic, or the range it can cover, or even just which edge to use. It all becomes chunked together until eventually the Zornhorn is no longer 12 bits of information, it's just the Zornhorn, it happens. With more and more training, more and more chunking happens, and the techniques move closer to muscle memory. This is where coaching and supervision are very important. If a student is training something incorrectly and making mistakes, then this error moves closer to muscle memory the longer it is left unaddressed. So the instructor must coach students to improve technical skill and must supervise students to ensure that the correct thing is being practiced. Otherwise, we run the risk that students will internalise and chunk the wrong information and end up putting the wrong information into muscle memory, and then that's a problem. There we go. So, 10 minutes to do this. Supervision. So, the HEMA drill. This is a model that I've come up with for my own use in structuring single lessons and also curriculums of lessons, a semester-long series of lessons. I've developed a model for use by instructors within my organisation, the Academy of Historical Arts, so that they can develop a series of lessons to ensure that everything is covered without forgetting or ignoring parts or any of the important facets of the art. If at the end of this you think this is quite a good model, please do feel free to use it in your own schools. But if you do, please do associate my name with it. I'm looking to write a book about this subject at some point in the future, so that would be good. So, to start with, Yggdrasil in the Norse mythology is a tree of life, the tree of worlds. It's just a really, really big tree that encapsulates everything. So, the roots of the HEMA Yggdrasil are the defence of oneself, and self-defence, keeping you safe. That should be primary outcome of everything. Artfulness, or technical correctness, the general style of what you're doing. How artful are you in your fighting? Health and safety, remembering when to wear a mask. Learning to use your gloves, this sort of thing. Making sure the students are not stabbing each other in the face too much. Healthiness, learning about healthiness in your own joints. Realising that this is the wrong way to stand, and this is better. Not fucking yourself up. Healthiness is good. Development of character. Learning to just suck it up and get on with the practice. Building your mental discipline, your self-control, just developing you as a person. This should be part of doing any martial art. Finally, history. Well, it's HEMA, for a reason, the H stands for something. There should be some element of history in what we're teaching. So, next, the trunk of the tree. These are the methods by which we teach the primary outcomes to the roots. Drills and exercises. I come up with something, students all do it, superb. Sparring. Sparring is an excellent way to teach. Games. Games are a very fun way to teach, very effective way of approaching problems. Competition. Regardless of what your thoughts in tournaments are, it is certainly one way to train things like self-defence. If you want to take part in the swordfish tournaments, you learn, keep your hands safe. Don't block with your head. Validation. Things like cutting tests. If you spend a year training how to do the cut from your shoulder, you take a sharp sword and a milk bottle, and the sword bounces off, you need to do it better next time. You're validating your teaching, you're validating your practice. Also, pedagogical tasks. Take one of your advanced students and tell the student to teach the beginners in the class. You're not doing the direct teaching, you're teaching indirectly. You're teaching both of them separate skills. The beginners learn the skills that you tell the advanced student to teach them. The advanced student learns the understanding of what you've asked him to teach the beginners. So you can use pedagogical tasks as a way of teaching some of your students. So these are ways that you can teach. The branches of the tree are the types of concepts and skills that we need to address, the sort of aspects that we need to address to have a holistic and well-rounded martial arts. We need to have mental aspects to what we do. We need to have some things to do with the practice. It needs to be these aspects. We need to have spatial aspects, awareness of our surroundings. We need to have physical aspects, how well we actually do things with our bodies. The leaves of the trees are the secondary outcomes that you want to achieve. The roots, things like self-defense, healthiness. These things are the primary outcomes that you want to be working towards in every single lesson. The secondary outcomes, you might address different secondary outcomes in different lessons, but you make sure you cover all of them across a series of lessons. So, in terms of the mental outcomes, you might want to address the understanding. Why are we doing this sort of thing? The discipline. You want to help people develop their self-discipline and self-control. Respect. You have to respect your opponents. You have to respect what they can do to you if you fuck up. You have to respect your weapon. These things are designed for killing, designed for injuring and maiming. You've got to respect the weapon. You've got to respect what you can do with it. It's very, very easy to think, he didn't block, it's fine. Boom! Oh, he didn't block. Oops. You've got to respect what you can do with it. The context. What is the context of what we're doing? Are we training this for sport, for the battlefield, for the study of history? What is our context? Validation. We need to validate what we think. We need to test things. We need to make sure it's all good. And finally, optionally, you might encourage your students to start their own research. Not everyone does their own research, and that's cool. Not everyone is a researcher. You need the brains, you need the bronze, but some people want to do research. So if you can, try and encourage that. But don't encourage it in the wrong people. In terms of practical outcomes, coordination. If you've got bad hand-to-eye coordination, you think, yes, I'm going to hit you in the head. Shit. You want to develop your coordination. Hit the bit that you want to hit. You need to develop your technique to become good at what it is you're doing. You need to develop your footwork. It's no use deciding to come forward and falling over. You need to develop how well you're doing your footwork. Your form, your posture. Is your balance down here somewhere, where you're still in balance, or do you throw yourself into fight like that? And I see that quite a lot. And then optionally, flair. How classy are you when you fight? It's not something that you have to develop. You don't have to look fluent or amazing or powerful or whatever. But it helps. It looks cool. Why not develop?
Would you call it a mental aspect as well?
It could be. could be. I've put it under practical because you do flare, but it could just well be out the mental side of things. In terms of the spatial outcomes, you need to be aware of your environment. Are you in a corner, up against two walls? Are you just up against one wall? Are you in a crowded training hall with 20 other people? In which case, maybe direct strikes and not these big helicopter strikes, smacking everyone around you. You need to be aware of your environment. You need to understand the concept of distance, the range that you can cover, and timing. These are important aspects that I don't think receive enough practice and enough coaching. You should be developing your spatial awareness. And finally, the physical outcomes. You want to develop explosiveness. It's no use training all these fancy techniques. The fastest you can do a strike is this. You need to be able to explode, to come from your position, and then all of a sudden the strike happens. It just happens. You need to develop your explosiveness. Your flexibility. It's not like we're training to do gymnastics or the splits or anything, but perhaps you're doing something like rapier, and you need to do these long lunges. If you don't have flexibility, this hurts. Balance. Well, if you don't have balance, you fall over. It's not good. Stamina. The more you want to fight, the longer you fight. You want to be able to keep fighting well for the whole thing. So you need to develop stamina and the ability to keep going. Strength. Strength isn't everything, but it helps. Enough said. Speed. Your ability to move swiftly or slowly as required. Sometimes you just need to move slowly and carefully and wait out your opponent, and sometimes you need to go, yes, there's an opening, here we go! And go forward into it. Speed. It's an important physical outcome that you need to train. So all of these leaves, all of these outcomes, these are secondary. You might structure your lessons so that your primary outcome is something like the artfulness. Or maybe you make it more of a history lesson this week, or whatever. Your secondary outcomes are these leaves. Things like your explosiveness, your ability to manage distance or cover distance. You might mix the explosiveness with covering distance, good form and posture and footwork, and good technique. That's something nice and simple. How do you cover distance with a strike? But you train these secondary outcomes as part of that exercise, and it's all leading towards your artfulness or your ability to defend yourself by smacking the other person first. Okay. As well as the tree itself, there's winds that blow the tree. And these are useful questions that the students should be able to answer. What are you doing? It's an amazing number of times I ask my students, what are you doing? They go, no idea. How are you doing it? How are you doing it, Thornhall? Useful question. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it just because? Or are you doing it for a reason? To whom are you doing it? It is entirely pointless for me to rush into grapple against someone like Harry. That's just not appropriate. However, if there's someone smaller than me, then perhaps that's a better option. To whom are you doing this technique? Is it sensible? Is it safe? When are you doing it? When we're starting out and we're 12 feet away from each other, do I run in and grapple? That's the wrong time to do it. Or, if another person attacks me and comes in close, at that point, do I come and grapple? When are you doing whatever it is you're doing? That's an important question. Ideally, your students should be able to answer all of these questions about their sparring. If you stop the sparring and just say, pause, what are you doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? Why on earth are you trying to grapple with a big guy? And that sort of thing. You should be helping your students to learn and understand how to answer these questions. And my apologies for the really terrible model. I suck at art. You've got the roots, the primary outcomes, the trunk, the methods of training, the branches are the types of outcomes, the leaves are the outcomes, the secondary outcomes. You've got the optional research and flair, and, well, you've got Ratatosk the squirrel, constantly revisiting everything. If you only do the basics in your first night and then keep becoming more complex thereafter, your students will never do the basic overhaul properly. They'll forget what this stance thing is. Constantly revisit. Run up and down the tree, revisit everything. So that's the rough one. I will make a better picture for you. So, the models I've covered so far, and I'm superb, I'm about on time. Teaching towards outcomes. The difference between teaching, coaching, training and supervision. The magic number 7 plus or minus 2. How much can someone remember? And finally the HEMA exosome. Across a series of lessons, I should be able to tick every box. I should be able to achieve all of the secondary outcomes and all of the primary outcomes. And I might decide to do that by using all of the types of training methods. Or not, it depends. It's a useful checklist. Have I covered everything? So, thank you for listening. Hope that's not been too boring or too much information. Do you have any questions or thoughts or ideas? Too much information there.
7. More than 7.
When is your book ready?
When is the book ready? As soon as I have time to write it. Okay, if you have any... Sorry, yes?
One more thing. You said you need a lot of repetitions.
Yes.
I absolutely agree with it. But it's very important that the students actually really know what they're doing, so that the explanation is good, and that you remind them why they're doing it, because only then can it actually go into the muscle memory properly.
I agree.
And if you just swing it around without actually knowing why you're doing it, it'll take a lot longer to get it on your back.
If I was to quantify the number of repetitions, perhaps 10,000 repetitions, fair enough. But every 50 will be accompanied by an explanation, again and again and again, until the explanation goes into muscle memory as well. But I'm afraid, I think it's Daniel's turn. So if you've got any ideas or any further questions or anything, please grab me later. I'd love to talk about it. Over to Daniel now.